Guys, welcome to another video. You've got Mr. Everything English, and now we are back to doing our top 10, our top 10 and our top 10. We began with top 10 about Mr. Macbeth, then we moved on to Scrooge, and now we come to An Inspector Calls. Now in my head, initially guys, this was supposed to be the last in the top 10 series, but I'm thinking Romeo and Juliet seems to be a big request, so I may do one more covering Romeo and Juliet. I haven't yet decided. If you do want it guys, just say it in the comments and I will do it. If not, I won't, because if nobody watches it, what's the point? Now, guys, my last few videos have been on English language, then they've been on the courses that I am running in the Easter holidays. And now guys, we're coming to a popular text, An Inspector Calls. Up and down the country guys, lots of students, lots of schools are using An Inspector Calls as a text for the exam. And I get it, it's a really good text. It's accessible for students, it's interesting in comparison to the others, and there's lots of content out there. However, the fact that it's so popular also comes with some problems, because when you type in key quotes from An Inspector Calls, you get like loads of different opinions. You get this quote and that quote and this quote. Now the issue with this guys is as follows. You have to look at quotes with an exam hat. So some of these websites, right, they'll say that the quote "Mummy and Mother" by Sheila Burling is a good quote, which I get it, it is a good quote. But how much can you do with that in an exam, in a paragraph? That is why guys, when I go over my top 10 quotes, I'm not looking for a debate. There's probably hundreds and literally hundreds of other quotes that can be used. But based upon my research and based upon my opinion, I think that these are the 10 quotes that are the best and the easiest to use in lots of different exam questions. And that's the important part. I try to find quotes that can fit lots of different questions, because nobody, and I always say it guys, nobody has time to be learning 50, 40 quotes per text. Like, it's madness. I've heard students say to me that their teachers told them to learn 50 quotes from Macbeth. How? Where are you going to find the time to learn 50 quotes from Macbeth, 50 quotes for An Inspector Calls, 50 quotes for Christmas Carol? It's not a memorization exam where they're going to sit opposite you and ask you to recite quotes. Out of all the quotes you're going to learn, how many are you going to use? 4? Imagine guys, an English literature essay, 30 marks, 45 minutes. You're looking at about 4 paragraphs, maybe 1 quote per paragraph. 4 quotes is what you're going to use. You don't need to learn lots and lots of quotes. You want to learn 10 quotes, but these 10 quotes should be applicable to lots of different questions. Now I'm gonna stop talking about that, because that's not what the purpose of the video is guys. The purpose of this video is to give you your top 10 quotes. So we're gonna begin with my favorite quote from Mr. Burling guys. Mr. Burling, just before the inspector arrives, he's completely in his element. Imagine guys, chest out, cigar puffing, Eric and Gerald are sitting there listening to their leader, and Mr. Burling is just completely gassed. He's just going in. And what does he say? He says to these 2 boys, "A man has to mind his own business and look after himself and his own." This quote, I don't know why I made that noise, but let's carry on. Guys, this quote, it sums up capitalism to a T. Sums it up to a T. There's no choice here. Mr. Burling doesn't give them an option. He doesn't say a man should, a man could. He says a man has to. Has to what? Mind his own business. Now business here guys has a double meaning. Business can mean your work, as in the business you run. Business can also mean what you get up to. Keep it to yourself. And it's irony. Why? Because all their business gets exposed in this play. Why? Because they don't mind their business, they stick their noses in other people's business. They all jump into Eva Smith's life in one shape or form. Look after himself and his own. The order, guys, the order of this quote is beautiful. Business, you, then other people. And that sums up capitalism. Capitalism is the belief that the two things that are the most important in your life is wealth, money, and you. Take care of these two first and then take care of everything else. And what does it create? It creates a society where people are selfish, where people become obsessed with their own desires, where people become obsessed for only helping others if it's in their own interest. And that is why, guys, this quote can be used to literally describe every character of the play. Mr. Burling sacks Eva Smith because it affects his wealth, it affects his business. Sheila Burling sacks her because it says, guys, a man has to mind his own business and look after himself and his own. Sheila Burling, guys, she hates the fact that Eva Smith may have insulted her in some way. Mrs. Burling, guys, Mrs. Burling can't handle the fact that Eva is impersonating the name Mrs. Burling, is treading upon her toes because she's so special in her life. How dare she say she's a Burling? How dare she? Because they've been raised with the ideology that you are special, you are super special. And if anyone threatens this belief, you take them out. Not literally, metaphorically. Guys, this quote is perfect for so many different scenarios. Guys, quote number two. These girls aren't cheap labor. These girls are people. Now, guys, when it comes to this idea, these girls aren't cheap labor, they are people. It's the battle. It's the battle between the two ideas. It's the battle between capitalism and it's the battle between socialism. And it's a perfect quote to use there. Now, when we look at our text, you've got Mr. Burling, Mrs. Burling, Gerald, who are your strict capitalists. Then you've got the inspector, Sheila, and kind of Eric on the verge, but Eric can also count as a socialist. And this is where the battle takes place. Now, when it comes to, guys, these girls aren't cheap labor, it doesn't just mean, in my opinion, it doesn't just mean labor as in workers. Mr. Burling treats Eva Smith like a worker. Gerald uses her the way a boss will use a worker, but Gerald uses her in a completely different way. Same thing with Eric Burling. They may say this, but look at the actions that follow through. But it's that point about what capitalism does to a person. Capitalism, guys, it changes the way people think. So people begin looking at other people as benefit, as workers. What can I get out of you? And if I can't get anything out of you, you might as well go now. And this quote, guys, is perfect for that. How capitalism has dehumanized people. You can even use this quote to look at how Mr. Burling views his own daughter. When he finds out that that Gerald has an affair, he almost, rather than telling Gerald off and shunning Gerald, he tells Sheila, kind of calm down, you're overreacting. Why? Because at that moment in time, his daughter is not a person to him. His daughter is a commodity. His daughter is cheap labor that he's selling to Gerald because it's a business deal. Their marriage is a business deal because by Sheila marrying Gerald, it raises all of their status. So, guys, remember what I told you? Find quotes that can be used for lots of different scenarios. Now, guys, with the next quote, it's quite a long quote. You pick what you need for the question. But the quote goes as follows, guys. If we were all responsible for everything that happened to everybody we'd had anything to do with, it would be very awkward, wouldn't it? And very awkward it is indeed, guys, because this is what exactly comes to haunt the Burling family. This quote, guys, you want to link it straight away to the idea of responsibility, wiping the hands clean. It's a quote, guys, it's a quote where literally the Burling family is wiping their hands away, not just from responsibility of Eva Smith, but the whole notion of responsibility. They're saying, listen, we're not responsible for anything. If we were responsible for everything that happened to everybody that we had anything to do with, it would be awkward. It wouldn't be normal. So they are wiping their hands clean of responsibility. But again, guys, again, it's this thinking, it's this ideology that comes back to bite them in the bum. Because they don't expect responsibility, they treat people as though they were objects. And therefore, by the end of Act 2 and the start of Act 3, everything's become awkward. Sheila's a hot mess because she can't believe what she's done. Gerald's gone for a walk because it was getting too hard for him. Mrs. Burling has just become crazy and blamed everything on Eric. Eric comes out and confesses that he's had an affair and has been stealing from his dad. And Mr. Burling, that guy doesn't know what to do. He's even offering money to the inspector by Act 3. It's become super awkward. What happened to the cigar puffing, strong, confident man who's now saying to the inspector, I'd give thousands, yes, thousands. Guys, that quote is beautiful for foreshadowing. Carry on living, Mr. Burling, guys, and Mrs. Burling, and these capitalists, they literally sum up their fate in this quote. Carry on doing what you're doing, because eventually life will become very awkward for you. All right, guys. Then when it comes to Mrs. Burling, guys, in Act 2, she says, when it talks about who was she blamed, she says, firstly, the girl herself, and secondly, I blame the young man who was the father of the child. He should be made an example of. Now, guys, this quote is dramatic irony. Why? Because later when she finds out it's Eric, she says, oh my God, if only I knew. If you knew. Why is that important? You want to link this quote, guys, to morality, to good and bad. She almost says, guys, that good is dependent upon who does it, and bad is dependent upon who does it. So she says that the father of the child should be blamed. But when she finds out it's Eric, it's as though it's bad, but it's not bad if Eric is the one who's done it. Therefore, her morality, she has none. Now, guys, what is morality? Morality is how you judge what is good and bad. So, for example, this pen. Stealing this pen is bad. But it's like me saying, stealing the pen is bad, but if this pen was stolen by X person, then it's okay. Now that is Mrs. Burling. But remember, we don't speak about these quotes in a very narrow way. These characters represent society. They represent an ideology. So it's the idea, guys, that Mrs. Burling, as well as all the other capitalists, have no fixed morality. Alright, guys, quote number 5. Guys, quote number 5. This is when Eric describes Eva, Daisy. And he says, guys, and he says, I wasn't in love with her or anything, but I liked her. She was pretty and a good sport. Now this quote, for patriarchy, is perfect. Because again, this is how all the men viewed the women, as good sports. Now what do you do in sport? You play games. There's a winner and there's a loser. And you can't play a game forever. Sooner or later, it's gonna end. And this is exactly how they treat, especially Gerald and Eric, this is exactly how they treat Eva. They use her. They literally use her, guys. Use her for what? They use her for sex. They use her for a good time. And the moment she's fulfilled her purpose, they kind of move on. Whether you agree or not, whether you say that Gerald might have loved her and Eric gives her money, at the end of the day, they treat her like a game. But why wouldn't they? This quote reflects how they can. Number one, they're men. So they naturally have more power over women in 1912 England. Number two, they're rich men. And they're not just kind of rich, they're super rich. So they can literally, guys, they can literally do whatever they want. And that still kind of exists today. I don't know, look at Conor McGregor. He punched some guy sitting in a pub. No one did anything. My point being, guys, being a man, being a super rich man, comes with privilege. And this is what Eric says. Guys, he says it openly. He's not even hiding it. He says it publicly in front of everyone. I didn't love her, I liked her. She was pretty and she was a good sport. So I did what I did. And there's no backlash. Because it was the norm. It's a perfect quote, guys, for gender, for patriarchy, for capitalism, for injustice, for how men viewed women, for the acceptance of injustice. That quote, guys, hits all of them. And then, guys, we move on to Mr. Inspector, who comes back with, we are members of one body and we are responsible for each other. Guys, when you have a toothache, your head hurts because the tooth is making your head hurt. When you have, when you break a nail, your whole body feels uncomfortable because everything is linked. That's the first part of the quote. We are members of one body, meaning if your tooth is hurting, your head is hurting. If your fellow brother or your fellow sister is hurting, you should help them because their pain is your pain. That's what the inspector is saying. And he makes it crystal clear in the second part of the quote. We are responsible for each other. And you want to use this quote, guys, as the literal right hook of socialism. This quote goes against everything Mr. Burling, Gerald, Mrs. Burling believe. And he says it openly. The first quote, guys, Mr. Burling was saying that a man has to make his own way and so on. The inspector comes back and says, we are responsible for each other. We are members of one body. So guys, this quote, you can use it for socialism, for responsibility, for a critique of Mr. Burling, a critique of Gerald, a critique of Mrs. Burling. You can use it to describe the character of the inspector. You can use it to talk about the society and the problem in society, that the problems existed because people didn't believe in collective responsibility. Lots of different ways, but that's just another way. Guys, quote number 7, guys. Quote number 7. Sheila Burling, does she change? Does she transform in this play? You can argue both sides that she doesn't change, but you can also argue that Sheila Burling does change. And a good quote to show change in this play is the quote, guys, in Act 3 from Sheila Burling, when she says to her family, the point is, you don't seem to have learnt anything. Now, she's very direct here. She's not kind of crying, she's not hysterical, she's not beating around the bush. She's very, very direct. And she tells her family that you haven't learned nothing, you haven't changed, you haven't progressed. Now, what I want you to pull out from this quote is probably 3 essential points. Number 1 is the power of socialism. Because remember, guys, I always say it, this text is a battle, not between Burling and the inspector, but between capitalism and socialism. And you want to talk about how this quote precisely shows the power of socialism and how socialism can transform a weak, shy, innocent person into a person with beliefs, with morality and a voice. Number 2, you can zoom in to the character of Sheila and have a discussion about gender, how Sheila literally becomes not Eva Smith, but like Eva Smith resurrected, if you like. She speaks for the people that have no voice. She speaks for the poor women, and she speaks for the poor men, and she speaks for the working class, and she speaks for the injustice. But point number 3, guys, is where you flip it on its head. She could say the point is, you don't seem to have learned anything, but that's just the point you want to make. Because Mr. Burling and Mrs. Burling haven't learned anything, just like Eva Smith, Sheila Burling, all she's going to do is talk, and eventually she'll stop talking because the power of the Burlings, the power of capitalism is just too much. Sheila Berlin, guys, I say in quite a few of my videos, the analogy I use, guys, it's like farting in the wind. Nobody's gonna notice. Sheila Berlin can shout what she wants. Eventually, she's gonna get married to Gerald and move on and sit and continue the way her mum did. And the proof of that, guys, is at the end of the play, when Gerald comes back, she alludes to the idea that she's going to take Gerald back. Guys, number 8. Before the inspector leaves, guys, he gives his warning. He warns the Berling family that if you don't change, understand one thing. One Eva Smith has gone, but there are millions of Eva Smiths, all intertwined with our lives. And if men will not learn that lesson, they will be taught it in fire, blood, and anguish. 2 links, guys. Fire, blood, anguish can either be hellfire or it can be World War One. You pick your poison depending upon the question in the exam. But guys, this is a quote that can be used. So guys, look, the Berling family, right, actually commit no crime. Mr. Berling sacks her. Sheila gets her sacked. Gerald has an affair. Mrs. Berling refuses to help her. And Eric sleeps with her, possibly rape, but it wasn't a crime. But he sleeps with her on multiple occasions and gives her money. Stealing from his family may be a crime, but I'm talking about Eva Smith specifically. None of them actually commit crimes, but they commit moral crimes. So this quote can be used for the idea where the inspector says, look, based upon the current system in charge of this country, which is capitalism, the ruling system may allow you guys to get away with your moral crimes, because unfortunately, moral crimes are not legal crimes. But understand one thing, if you don't fix up, if you don't change, turmoil awaits. World War One awaits. Hellfire awaits. Guys, quote number 9. This is a lovely quote, guys, when looking at gender. If you ever get a question about gender or roles, family, theme-related questions, Mrs. Berling questions, Sheila Berling questions, how the men are in charge questions, you want to use the quote, guys. When you're married, you realize that men with important work to do sometimes have to spend all their time and energy on their business. Mrs. Berling, guys, she knows her role so well. She knows what she should be doing as a woman, as a wife of a businessman, of a capitalist in a patriarchal society in 1912 England. And she raises her daughter in the same way that you will also follow and do as I say. And guys, quote number 10 is, clothes mean something different, or clothes mean something quite different to a woman. This quote is perfect when looking at how men viewed women, how women were viewed in society. And it's the idea that men were powerful, therefore men were judged upon their wealth, as that was the closest link to masculinity. However, women were judged primarily upon what you saw, how you looked. And this is what dictated how you were treated afterwards. It's almost implying that the more dressed you are, the more respect you have. The more skin you show, the less respect you have. The nicer your clothes, the more respect you have. The cheaper your clothes, the less respect you have. It puts a condition on respect. It puts a condition on love. It puts a condition on how people treat one another, especially how the men treated the women. And guys, those are 10 quotes that I think are good to use when it comes to Inspector Calls. They can be used in lots of different scenarios. Now, there's loads of other quotes like mummy and mother, cranks, but these are one-word quotes. I'm not going to put them in my top 10 list because those quotes, just learn them. They're easy to remember. But when it comes to 10 good quotes that have good AO2, which is language, structure, form, these are the 10 you want to use and try to apply to lots of different questions. All right, cool guys. I will end the video here. It's been Mr. Everything English. Peace.